Right now, as you watch this video, a weather event is unfolding across the northern hemisphere that is quietly killing more people than hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods combined. There are no dramatic pictures of it, no collapsing buildings, no walls of water. It does not even have a name. And that is exactly why it is so dangerous, because the deadliest weather disaster in American history was not a storm, it was not an earthquake, it was heat. Silent, invisible, patient heat. And the records being broken this summer in cities across the United States, Canada, and Europe are records that no living person has ever seen broken before. Some of them had stood for more than a century. Some of them had stood since before your grandparents were born. This summer they are falling one after another, and the part of this story that almost no one is telling you is not how hot the days are getting. It is what is happening at night, because the number that decides whether a heat wave inconveniences a city or kills hundreds of people inside it is not the number on the thermometer at 3 in the afternoon. It is the number at 3 in the morning. And that number this summer has been doing something the human body was never built to survive. I am Your Name, and this is your channel. If this kind of deep, investigative look at real threats is what you come here for, subscribe right now, because we go this far into real science every single week. Now, let us start from the beginning with what is actually happening right now. Starting in late June of this year, a massive dome of high pressure parked itself over the central and eastern United States and refused to move. More than 200 million Americans, roughly 2 out of every 3 people in the country, found themselves living underneath it. Meteorologists call this a heat dome, and the mechanics of it matter because once you understand how it works, you understand why it is so hard to escape. High in the atmosphere, a ridge of hot, heavy air settles over a region like a lid on a pot. That lid does 3 things at once. It pushes air downward, and sinking air compresses and heats up, the same way a bicycle pump gets hot when you squeeze air through it. It blocks clouds from forming, so the sun beats down on the ground with nothing in the way, and it traps the heat that builds up underneath it, so every day starts hotter than the day before. The heat feeds itself. The ground dries out, and dry ground heats faster than wet ground, which strengthens the ridge, which dries the ground further. It is a feedback loop, and once it locks in place, it can sit over a region for a week, 2 weeks, sometimes longer, cooking everything underneath it. And this dome has been breaking records at a pace that meteorologists describe with words they normally avoid. In the month of June alone, according to weather station data compiled by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, daily high temperature records across the United States were matched or broken more than 1,500 times. 1,500 records in a single month. Then July arrived, and the dome tightened its grip during the 1 week when the entire country goes outside. Washington, D.C. hit 103 degrees on the 4th of July, the hottest Independence Day in the recorded history of the nation's capital. The parade was canceled. In Philadelphia, the city recorded 3 consecutive days above 101 degrees for the first time in its history, and its July 4th celebrations were canceled too. Atlantic City, New Jersey, a city built on the ocean, where the sea breeze is supposed to make extreme heat nearly impossible, tied the hottest temperature ever measured there. 106 degrees on a boardwalk beside the Atlantic Ocean. Across the border in Canada, Ottawa recorded a humidex, the Canadian measure of how hot the air actually feels on human skin, of 46 degrees Celsius. That is 115 degrees Fahrenheit of felt heat in a city famous for being buried in snow half the year. In the week surrounding the holiday, at least 148 daily high temperature records were set across the eastern United States. And when the dome finally weakened in the east, it did not disappear. It shifted west and began the same process all over again on the other side of the country. But here is where this story leaves the weather report behind and becomes something much more serious. Because the question that matters is not how hot it got. The question is what heat like this actually does to a human body, and why the specific pattern of this summer's heat is the most dangerous pattern that exists. Your body is a machine that runs at 98.6 degrees, and it defends that temperature with everything it has. When the air around you gets hot, your heart begins pumping harder, pushing blood toward the surface of your skin to dump heat into the air. Your sweat glands open, and as sweat evaporates off your skin, it carries heat away with it. This system is remarkably good. It is the reason humans can run marathons in the desert, but it has 2 weaknesses, and the summer's heat is aimed directly at both of them. The first weakness is humidity. Sweating only cools you if the sweat can evaporate, and evaporation depends on the air having room to absorb more moisture. When humidity is high, the air is already nearly full. Your sweat sits on your skin, doing nothing, while your body keeps producing it, draining your water and your salts for zero cooling in return. Scientists combine heat and humidity into a single number called the wet bulb temperature, and it is one of the most important numbers in climate science because there is a ceiling on it. At a wet bulb temperature around 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 Celsius, evaporative cooling stops working entirely, even for a young, healthy person sitting still in the shade with unlimited water. Past that line, your core temperature simply rises until your organs begin to fail. And here's the finding that should concern everyone watching this. Recent laboratory research on real human subjects has found that the actual limit is lower than the theory predicted. In studies where volunteers were monitored in controlled heat chambers, healthy young adults began losing the ability to stabilize their core temperature at wet bulb values well below 95, especially during light activity. The safety margin we thought we had is smaller than we believed. The heat dome this summer pushed heat indices across major American cities to between 105 and 115 degrees. That is not the danger zone approaching. For millions of people, that is the danger zone arrived. The second weakness of the human cooling system is the one that kills the most people. And it is the part of this story that almost never makes the headlines. Your body cannot run its cooling system forever. The elevated heart rate, the fluid loss, the strain on the kidneys, all of it accumulates like a debt. And the only way the body pays that debt down is at night, when temperatures drop and the cardiovascular system finally gets to rest. This is why the single most predictive number for heat deaths is not the daytime high. It is the overnight low. When nights stay hot, the body never recovers. It enters the next day already in debt, and the debt compounds. Day 1 of a heat wave, hospitals see a trickle. Day 3, with no overnight relief, they see a flood. During this summer's heat dome, overnight low temperatures in parts of the eastern United States did not fall below the mid-80s. Let that sink in. The coolest moment of the entire day, the deepest point of the night, was 85 degrees. For an elderly person in a brick apartment with no air conditioning, that is not an uncomfortable night. That is a night their heart spends entirely at full effort, with nothing left in reserve for the morning. And we know exactly what that looks like when it happens to a city, because it has happened before, and the most instructive example took place in the middle of America, in July of 1995. That month, the heat dome settled over Chicago. The daytime highs reached 106, but the true killer was the nights, which stayed in the 80s, trapped and amplified by millions of tons of brick, asphalt, and concrete that had spent all day soaking up the sun and spent all night radiating it back out. This is the urban heat island effect, and it can make a city core 10 degrees hotter at night than the countryside just beyond it. Over the course of about 1 week, roughly 739 people in Chicago died from the heat. Most of them died alone. They were overwhelmingly elderly, living by themselves in the upper floors of buildings without air conditioning, in neighborhoods where they were afraid to open their windows at night. The morgue ran out of space, and the city had to bring in refrigerated trucks to hold the bodies. 9 refrigerated trailers parked outside the medical examiner's office in an American city because of weather that produced no wind, no rain, and not a single dramatic photograph. When researchers later mapped exactly who died, the pattern was brutal in its clarity. Heat does not kill randomly, it hunts the isolated. The strongest predictor of death was not just age or income, it was whether anyone checked on you. 8 years later, the same silent mechanics played out on a continental scale. In August of 2003, a heat wave settled over Western Europe, a region where at the time air conditioning was rare because it had simply never been needed. France recorded temperatures above 104 degrees in a country built for mild summers. By the time the heat broke, the estimated death toll across Europe had reached approximately 70,000 people. 70,000. That is a number we associate with wars and pandemics, and it happened in some of the wealthiest, most medically advanced nations on Earth, in the space of a few weeks, largely to elderly people in apartments, while much of the country was away on summer holiday. In France alone, nearly 15,000 died, and the crisis was so invisible while it was happening that the scale of it was only fully understood afterward, when statisticians compared the number of deaths that August to the number in a normal August and found the difference. And if you think modern forecasting has solved this, consider what happened in June of 2021 in one of the mildest climates in North America. A heat dome formed over the Pacific Northwest, a region where many homes have no air conditioning because for a century they never needed it. Portland, Oregon reached 116 degrees. Seattle reached 108. Power cables melted. Roads buckled. And in the village of Lytton, British Columbia, the temperature reached 121.3 degrees Fahrenheit, the highest temperature ever recorded in Canada, hotter than the all-time record of Las Vegas, in a village at 50 degrees north latitude. The day after setting that record, Lytton caught fire and was almost entirely destroyed. Across British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, the heat dome killed an estimated 800 or more people in a matter of days. And when climate scientists ran attribution studies on that event, they concluded it would have been virtually impossible without human-caused warming. Not less likely, virtually impossible. The atmosphere had produced something that the old climate, the one every building and power grid in that region was designed for, simply could not produce. Which brings us to the part of this story that keeps emergency planners Awake at night, the scenario that sits underneath every heat wave like a trap door. Everything modern society uses to survive extreme heat, every air conditioner, every fan, every refrigerator keeping insulin cold, every hospital cooling system, depends on one thing: the electrical grid. And extreme heat attacks the grid at the exact moment demand for electricity hits its maximum. Transmission lines sag and lose capacity in high temperatures. Transformers overheat. Power plants that rely on river water for cooling lose efficiency as the rivers warm. The grid is being asked for more than it has ever delivered at the precise moment it is least able to deliver it. Researchers have modeled what would happen if a major American city lost power for multiple days during a peak heat wave, and the results for a city like Phoenix are almost impossible to process. With indoor temperatures climbing uncontrolled in a city where summer survival is entirely dependent on air conditioning, the modeling projected that roughly half the population could require emergency medical care, and that deaths could reach into the thousands, potentially exceeding 10,000 people, from a single blackout during a single heat wave. The hospitals themselves would be dark. This has not happened yet. But every summer of record demand on aging infrastructure is another pull on that trapdoor. And this summer, grid operators across multiple regions have already issued emergency alerts, asking millions of people to reduce their power use during peak hours, which is the polite way a grid tells you it is running out of margin. Now, before we go further, there is something this story does not include, and it is worth being direct about it because coverage of extreme weather online is full of it. This heat is not caused by secret weather weapons, by radio installations, or by anything being sprayed from aircraft. The physics here is over a century old and painfully well understood. Carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases trap heat. The baseline temperature of the planet rises. And when a natural heat dome forms on top of that raised baseline, it reaches heights it could not have reached before. This year, that human-driven warming has been amplified further by natural ocean cycles running warm. The heat waves of this summer are not mysterious. They are exactly what climate scientists have been publishing in forecasts for decades, arriving on schedule. Chasing conspiracy theories does not just waste time. It actively distracts from the preparation that genuinely saves lives, and that preparation is simpler than most people think. So let us talk about it, because the most important practical message of everything we have laid out is this: heat deaths are among the most preventable. Deaths in all of weather, and the things that prevent them cost almost nothing. First, understand that fans stop protecting you at a certain point. When indoor air temperature climbs into the high 90s and beyond, a fan is no longer cooling your body. It is blowing hot air across your skin like a convection oven and can actually accelerate heat stress. If you do not have air conditioning, during extreme heat, you need a cooler location, a cooling center, a library, a shopping mall, a friend's home, even for just a few hours a day, because those few hours pay down the heat debt your body is accumulating. Second, water, before you feel thirsty, because by the time thirst arrives during extreme heat, you're already behind. Third, know the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke, because the line between them is the line between resting in the shade and dying. Heavy sweating, dizziness, nausea, cramps, that is exhaustion, and it means stop, cool down, hydrate immediately. But confusion, slurred speech, hot skin that has stopped sweating, that is heat stroke. The body's cooling system has failed, and it is a medical emergency where minutes matter. Cool the person with water and ice while help is coming, because every minute above a critical core temperature is cooking the brain and the organs. And fourth, the single most powerful life-saving tool identified in every heat disaster from Chicago to Paris: check on people. The elderly neighbor who lives alone, the relative who says they are fine on the phone because they always say they are fine. Heat kills the isolated, and a knock on a door twice a day during a heat emergency is statistically one of the most effective medical interventions that exists. The records falling this summer are not the end of anything. They are the new starting line. The heat wave that no one alive has ever seen becomes the heat wave everyone remembers. And then, a few summers later, it becomes an ordinary July. The atmosphere is not going to meet us halfway. The only question is whether our buildings, our grids, and our habits catch up before the trapdoor scenario stops being a model and becomes a headline. Subscribe now if you want to keep following stories like this one. Drop a comment below with what surprised you most in this video, and share it with someone who lives in one of the cities we mentioned, because this is a story people need to hear while the heat is still here, not after. But before you go, let us add one more dimension to this story that almost every piece of coverage leaves out entirely. And it may be the most unsettling fact in this whole video. We do not actually know how many people heat kills, not even close. When a hurricane strikes, it has a name, a landfall time, and a death toll that gets updated on the news every hour. Heat has none of that. When an elderly man with a heart condition dies during a 105-degree night, his death certificate usually says heart attack. It does not say heat, even though on a normal night his heart would have carried him through. When a construction worker's kidneys fail 2 days after a shift in extreme heat, the record says kidney failure. The heat that caused it is invisible in the statistics. This is why official heat death counts, and scientific estimates of heat deaths are wildly different numbers. Officially, heat is recorded as killing a few hundred to a couple of thousand Americans in a bad year. But when researchers use excess mortality analysis, the same method that revealed the true scale of the 2003 European disaster, comparing how many people actually died during heat waves against how many normally would have, the estimates for the United States climb far higher, with peer-reviewed studies placing the real annual toll in the thousands to above 10,000 deaths, many times the official count. Globally, recent research published in major medical journals estimates that heat contributes to hundreds of thousands of deaths every single year, which means the deadliest weather phenomenon on Earth is also the most undercounted, and that undercounting has consequences. Disasters that are not counted are not funded. There is no famous charity telethon for a heat wave. There are no dramatic rescue photographs, because the victims die quietly, indoors, one at a time, scattered across a city. The disaster hides inside ordinary causes of death. And so the political urgency to harden power grids, to open cooling centers, to protect outdoor workers with enforceable rules never quite matches the body count. Some scientists and public health officials have begun arguing that heat waves should be named and categorized like hurricanes, precisely to make the invisible visible. And a handful of cities around the world have already run trials of the idea. It's because the pattern of this summer, the 1,500 broken records, the nights that never cooled, the oceanside city hitting 106 degrees, is not an anomaly to be waited out. It is a preview. The heat dome that formed this summer will dissolve the way they always do. The conditions that built it are not going anywhere. And the people who understand that now, who prepare their homes, check their neighbors, and treat a heat warning with the same seriousness as a hurricane warning, are the people who will walk out the other side of the next record-breaking summer. The heat is patient. It does not need to be dramatic. It only needs a hot night, a failing grid, and a door that nobody knocked on.